Yes, here we go. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending today's press conference. It has been called because we have, just before we started, filed an application for sanctions against certain designated persons to be imposed by the Foreign Secretary for the United Kingdom. I will explain to you shortly who we are asking to be sanctioned and the way in which the sanction regime works. My name is Rodney Dixon. I am a barrister acting on behalf of a number of victims who have appointed our legal team to act on their behalf. These are victims of serious human rights violations in Tunisia, and it's against certain Tunisian officials that we're asking the Foreign Secretary to act. I'm honored to be here today with Kautha Fejani, whose father, Saied Fejani, MP, has been detained. He's one of the victims who we're acting on behalf of. He has been imprisoned in appalling conditions and has been on hunger strike for 10 days. We'll have the privilege from hearing directly from Kautha after I've explained a bit of the background. The sanctions regime in the United Kingdom came into force in 2020. It is called the Global Human Rights Sanctions Regulations, and it was enacted in order to allow our government here to impose sanctions against those who commit serious human rights violations anywhere throughout the world. There are already a number of persons on this list from various different countries, and as you can imagine, Russia has featured very prominently. It is open to the Foreign Secretary to apply this regime directly to the current Tunisian president and his government. We have submitted today a confidential filing in which we have set out, on behalf of our victim clients, the evidence of serious human rights violations that have been committed by the current president, President Saied, and a number of the key officials around him, including the two former ministers of Interior, the last having resigned only recently, the Minister for National Defense, and the Justice Minister. So 5 top-ranking officials who the evidence shows are responsible for a concerted campaign since July 2021 to crack down on all opposition, those who raise criticism, those who dissent from the government, journalists, civil society activists, human rights defenders, and a number of civil society groupings. We have set out in our application the evidence of these abuses and breaches of international human rights law. And we are asking the Foreign Secretary to review it urgently and impose sanctions against these particular individuals who we have identified and provided information about. It is open to the Foreign Secretary, and we have urged this, for him to impose travel bans on these persons, so they cannot come to the United Kingdom. They cannot come here to do political business or any other business, plus to trace their assets here and to freeze them, to freeze any bank accounts, and not to allow them to conduct their affairs or do any business in the United Kingdom. This can also apply to their relatives and those associated with them, and we are able to add further names and information to our current list and provide that to the Foreign Secretary for review. The government has at its disposal the necessary resources and abilities to assist in finding assets, however they might be hidden, however they might be attached to others, and to freeze those assets. We, as I say, have provided a confidential submission, and we hope that that will be taken forward so that the necessary investigations and inquiries can be made and action can be taken, as the government has showed it is capable of doing in relation to many other countries. The same, we say, should apply here, given the gravity and scale of the human rights violations. We will also be, so that it is clear that we're not limiting it to the shores of the United Kingdom, looking to apply for the same sanctions to be imposed in other countries, including in the European Union, which has a similar sanctions regime. So it won't only be here, but it will be wherever the current regime has their assets and money stashed. And they won't be able to, if those sanctions are imposed, travel to any of those countries. This regime here and in the EU was established, as it exists in many other countries as well, to deter those who commit serious human rights violations, to attempt to prevent them from continuing. Obviously, clearly to condemn them and to make a very clear stand against their gravity. But at the same time, not for it to be merely theoretical, but to seek to actually ensure that there's a deterrent effect in order to protect human rights and protect those in particular who are still in detention or who could be arrested any day on the streets in Tunisia. So we are saying that our application falls squarely within the overall aim and object of the sanctions regime here and elsewhere. We have set out how we meet all of the necessary requirements. As I underlined, the particular individuals and their details have been identified in detail. And the Foreign Office is now able to take that forward and act on it. We are saying as soon as possible. The procedure is, once the application has been filed, as has just occurred, we will pursue it further with the Foreign Office. We will provide any additional information, and we hope that it can bear fruit soon, both here and, as I say, in other countries where we will be making the necessary applications in due course. We want to create a web around the world where those who are responsible for these outrageous violations will not be free to travel and continue their life and business as though everything is normal. It is there to send a strong signal that these abuses must end. And of course, if they do, which is our aim, the sanctions can be lifted. But until they continue, if they continue, then these sanctions must be pursued and they must be imposed rigorously. It is what we are submitting to our government and what we'll be doing to other governments as well. Just so you have some background to the violations that we have set out, we have explained the process of current President Saied's rise to power and the way in which he dissolved the parliament, dissolved democratic institutions, and through a series of presidential decrees, assumed total control of the political life of Tunisia. This going back, as I mentioned, to July 2021. We have then also set out the ways in which those decrees have been used to throttle all opposition and free speech, and how in particular persons have been harassed, detained, abducted, and even killed. Most recently, in February and March of this year, there's been a spike in repression, with a number of prominent opposition figures and MPs being arrested, where many of them still remain in detention. The president has vowed to continue that campaign and has used inflammatory language such as calling those who oppose him cancer cells. He has, and his government has, on the evidence, been stoking up the flames to turn people against those who oppose him. And he's done precisely the same in relation to migrant workers in Tunisia, using highly insulting language to seek to turn people against them as well, which has resulted in attacks, intimidation, persons being expelled and deported. It's a powder keg because of these actions. And this is precisely why we say our government and others should stand together to say enough is enough. This is not going to be allowed to implode in our faces, causing a crisis both within Tunisia and abroad as well. The recent crackdown has been particularly concerning. It has been condemned by the EU Parliament, it has been condemned by the UN, and by many other bodies as well. And those words are to be welcomed. But we say, without the bite of sanctions, there's little hope that things will change. Persons who commit these violations need to be held to account. And sanctions is one way of doing that. We wish to emphasize today that there are many other legal channels as well that can be pursued. And on behalf of our clients, we will look to follow all channels to protect human life. Tunisia is signed up, in particular, to the International Criminal Court in The Hague. It is an ICC member state. It is also signed up to the African Court, where individual petitions are permitted, and also is a signatory of the Torture Convention and the protocols that allow for complaints to be made. There are a number of avenues where the Tunisian government can be held to account under international law to ensure that it fulfills its obligations and does not consistently flout them, as the evidence shows it is doing. I want to mention in particular our 4 clients, but at the same time emphasize that they are part of a group of hundreds and thousands who are being targeted in this way. The evidence shows that there is a pattern, a policy of widespread violations being committed that is only growing. And we have provided that evidence to the Foreign Secretary to show the seriousness of this matter. These are not isolated incidents. The same things are happening in the same way over a consistent period of time, going back to July 2021, but only getting worse. And we know that it's going to decline even further unless very clear and principled action is taken. Particular victims who we represent are Noureddin Berry, MP, who was taken from his home on the 13th of February of this year, and who has been beaten up during his arrest and thereafter. He was the former Minister of Justice, a prominent, outspoken critic of the President and his current government. Secondly, Judge Akrimi, who was the former public prosecutor, also violently arrested in February and taken to an undisclosed site. Then there's Rida Bozayo, who was killed in protest actions a year ago, in January 2022. His son has asked us to act on behalf of his murdered father. No one has ever been held to account for his murder at the hands of the police when he was taking part in protest actions. And then there's Said Fajani, who I mentioned at the beginning, a prominent MP and opposition figure who was detained on the 27th of February and who, despite being subjected to extensive interrogation in appalling, overcrowded conditions, there's not been a shred of evidence produced to justify the charges that are being made. In this case, as in these cases, as in many other cases, very often what happens is that there are vague allegations made with no evidence in an attempt to try and dishonestly justify holding people and harassing them, intimidating them, putting pressure on their families. But as you can see today, they're not deterred. They are here, they are speaking out. They will continue fighting for justice and accountability for what is happening. These are but a sample, very serious, but a sample of a number of persons who've been targeted recently and previously, including journalists who the EU Parliament has singled out, and other activists as well. We're seeing a spiral in this pattern, and the time has come to ensure that the world speaks out and prevents further torture, abuse, and violations of human rights. I just want to conclude with something that our Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, said when he came into office, because I think it's very important for emphasizing what we're doing today and why we're doing it. And we hope that this will guide his consideration of our application. He was talking about the human rights violations that beset many countries in the world. And he said, we are right to express our horror and revulsion, but our words will always count for more when they are backed by action. I will, and this is the Foreign Secretary saying, I will ensure this remains the theme of British diplomacy. We are not passive observers, and we should not merely voice our feelings. We will use our country's leverage to make a difference. And that is what we are calling on our government to do today, to make a difference through action and impose the sanctions that we have asked for, that are properly based on the sanctions regime, properly based on the law, and on the evidence we have gathered. Thank you. I will have time for questions at the end about those details, but most importantly, I want to hand over now to Goato, who will tell you about the situation her family faces and what she is asking for.
Thank you. My father, Said Fajani, is currently languishing in a Tunisian prison for the second time in his life under yet another power-hungry Tunisian dictator. The first time I was 3 years old, I watched police storm our home and hold my dad down on the kitchen floor. This was 1987 under the Ben Ali regime. My father was severely tortured using methods that are illegal under international law. His back was broken and he was unable to walk. At times his torture was so severe he ended up in a coma for 5 days. Unfortunately, after all the gains, albeit imperfect, of the Tunisian revolution, at 68, my father is yet again paying the price for his commitment to human rights and his participation in democracy. On Monday, the 27th of February, after initially being asked to attend a police interview as a witness to the Instalingo conspiracy, my father was interrogated. My parents' home was raided by police, yet despite finding no evidence, he was detained and a hearing was set in source 2 days later on the 1st of March. The prosecution were convinced of my father's answers and we were hopeful he would be let go. However, due to pressure from Kais Saied, they issued a prison warrant without charge until they find evidence. In most countries, including the Tunisia before the coup, this is not lawful. The judge was unable to look my father in the eye while issuing his imprisonment. This has been a common ethical dilemma amongst the Tunisian judiciary since the crackdown began after Kais's coup, where judges are visibly nervous, embarrassed, and at times even crying when issuing out unlawful detentions. Some have resorted to taking sick leave in order to avoid issuing false imprisonments. In the case of Judge Bashir Akademi's detention, the lead judge told his family, "It's either him or me," referencing the ultimatum Kais gave the judiciary of either detaining those he wished imprisoned or be considered as conspirators. As my father told his lawyer, "We have shifted from the independence of the judiciary to the use and abuse of the judiciary." My father immediately went on hunger strike. For him, this was the only way he could protest the sham hearings he and his fellow political prisoners were subjected to. The conditions in which my father is being held are concerning. He was placed in an overcrowded cell with around 120 inmates, and his health began to deteriorate. He was sent to the hospital a few times, where he once lost consciousness while doctors tried to retrieve his blood without uncuffing him. In my father's own words, the case against him is nothing but an attempt to whitewash and to normalize the coup and take revenge against its opponents, and that it is based only on accusations by individuals who have had their honesty and integrity severely called into question. My father has spent most of his life fighting dictatorship and oppression and advocating for human rights, whether in Tunisia or as a community activist during his 21 years of exile in the UK. As a democratically elected MP and prominent figure in Tunisian politics, my father has played an instrumental role in promoting democracy and human rights in Tunisia since the 2011 Arab Spring. His imprisonment, along with other political prisoners, which include politicians from across the political spectrum, journalists and judges, human rights activists, is a blatant attempt to suppress opposition voices and peaceful dissent. The collapse of Tunisia's democracy and its descent into a fascist dictatorship under Kais represents a great tragedy. His recent racist comments about Black African migrants, as well as pushing his replacement theory as a means of staying in power, have resulted in physical violence against Black people in Tunisia. Our government needs to make it clear that there is zero tolerance for human rights abusers. Only a clear message through sanctions, starting here in Britain and across the international community, will make dictators understand that there will be no place for them to run. As a British citizen and a daughter who hasn't been able to communicate with her father for 24 days, I ask the UK government to demand the release of all political prisoners, to condemn the Tunisian government's trajectory towards authoritarianism and its crackdown on political dissent, to urge the Tunisian government to uphold the rule of law and respect the fundamental rights of all Tunisians, to condemn Kais's racist targeting of Black migrants. I also implore Facebook to stop allowing harmful figures who are intentionally spreading disinformation and targeted campaigns against Kais's opponents. In some cases, these profiles with huge followings were influential in the detention of some of the political prisoners we see today. My father has always believed in democracy and the rule of law, in defending the rights of those who are oppressed, and sends a clear message. I will speak loudly from inside and outside Tunisia, with those who share with me the belief in values of freedom, democracy, and human rights. As for the Tunisian government, I send the following message. My father and those who have dedicated their lives to a democratic Tunisia may be confined in the Tunisian jails you have put them in, or awaiting their sham verdicts, but their ideals and supporters are not.
Thank you very much. Our full support is with you and your family at this difficult time. What is key is that your voice and all of our voices together are heard through this request we've made today and the future ones that we'll make. And for those to then be echoed, not only with words from our governments, but action. That is what's going to make the difference now. I'm going to open it up for any questions from the floor here. I should also say that we are live streaming this event to a number of places around the world, and not all journalists are able to come or often attend press conferences like this. It's the modern world now where we can send everything widely. So there are a number of people online, and I wish to welcome them as well and thank them for attending and for following and supporting us. And any questions that they have, we can receive those on the computer, and those can be read out. It is also being streamed in Arabic as well, and any questions that might be able to be conveyed can come through those channels, or obviously here as well. Yes, let me start here and then I'll move around that way.
Chris Doyle from the Council for Arabic Understanding. Thank you very much, and it was really heartbreaking to hear the story of what happened to your father again. And I just wanted to ask more legal questions, and one's about the British government. Just wondered if there had been any contact with the British government and the Foreign Office yet regarding this case away from your submission. You know, have you heard from the Foreign Secretary about views? Have they reached out to any of the families to meet with them at all? And secondly, is there a case so far under these new sanctions regimes where the government has taken action pursuant to individuals approaching the government as opposed to the government itself taking an initiative?
Yes, let's just do a few questions. One at the back there. Yes.
I want to ask also right now, if it's possible. نحب نعرف شنو تطلبي كابن سجين سياسي شنو تطلبي من الحكومة البريطانية؟
I'll ask you just to do the question and answer in English after, but let's take one more question over here.
Can we have the names, please, of the people you represent and the people that you want sanctioned? Can we have their names clearly read out in Arabic?
Yes, we can provide them all afterwards for you.
And does any of them hold another nationality other than that of Tunisia?
As far as we know, no. But those are all matters that are being inquired into. As far as we understand, not. But that doesn't prevent the government here or other governments imposing sanctions. It's a universal regime. But afterwards, we can give you all of the names and exact spellings so that we don't go into all of that. Now, I'll take another question and we'll give you the details afterwards.
One question for yourself is when will you find out when the response in regards to the sanctions request that you give Mr. James Cleverly and to Kalfa might be able to answer this right now. How have yourselves and other families been able to get information from inside the prisons in regards to your father's condition? And have there been any family members who've been able to actually visit your father as well? Thank you.
All right. Let me start, and then we'll go on to the other questions. With regard to individuals petitioning and whether that has happened before, the regime specifically allows for individuals to provide information. So it's there not just for the government to sit back and wait. Of course, they can take the initiative proprio moto as well, but it's there to encourage, and they provide a link and a web page to explain it all and to provide evidence, which is exactly what we've done. We're going through the system that is there, and they've certainly, based on material that they've got before, decided to act in a number of different cases. So there is a precedent for this, and what we are saying is that we fall squarely within this regime, and they should be doing what they're doing in other countries. This shouldn't be selective. I'm not saying it is in any way, but it shouldn't be. It should apply equally across the board based on the evidence, and if there is sufficient evidence of human rights violations, which we say there is. It's not a question of picking or choosing or trying to decide which countries are worse or not. It shouldn't be that kind of competition. Where there's a clear basis on the evidence to show violations, then they should act under the regime, which is what we are relying on. So we are hoping that they'll do exactly as they've done, as they should do in other cases. With regard to any contact with the Foreign Office previously, I understand that there has been some through the families. That's been done on a private basis. It's not been done publicly like this or in a legal form. This is the first legal step that we've taken. And now that it has been submitted, we will look to pursue it, follow it up, see if we can engage and meet and provide any further evidence if there are questions in order to try and speed it up. There's unfortunately no timeline for this. It's entirely within the discretion of the Foreign Secretary, and it depends on, of course, all of their competing priorities. But that's why what we're trying to do is send out the message very loud and clear today and in the media, and we'd ask you to do that as well, to say that this is urgent, and that the sooner they look at it, the sooner they act, the sooner the suffering that we've been hearing about can be addressed. It can make a real difference in protecting people, in protecting their security, in protecting their lives. It's not something academic or theoretical that can be left for down the line and say, okay, we might have some time later on in the year. It's something that if you act now, it can make a real difference. So we will be in all of our engagements urging that it be dealt with urgently, because this is ongoing. It's not looking at a historic matter. This is ongoing. And as we've all emphasized, it's only going to get worse unless decisive action is taken. With regard to information from inside the prison, perhaps you could comment on that.
Yeah. So currently, I know with my family, we only hear from the lawyer who gets to see him. Currently, there's only a few lawyers that are representing all the prisoners. They're actually quite stretched. So once a week, we hear updates. Also, because none of my father's, all of us are in the UK, we haven't managed to see him. But one of my aunts has seen my father. And I think with regards to the other families, they get to see their family member, I think, once a week, and they hear from their lawyer as well. I don't know if that answered the question.
And the question
Sorry. The question where you said, what do I ask from the UK government? Well, I said most of it in the statement, but I think I want to remind the UK government. I'm going to be speaking in English on this. I prefer to speak in English when it comes to this. So if you could translate it. Yeah, if you could translate it. So with regards to the UK government, I want to remind them that this isn't a simple continuation of authoritarianism. We had a democracy. Kais is not just specifically targeting people, and the crackdown isn't just about the people, and obviously we want them released. He's systematically dismantling the democracy they've created in the last 10 years. And I think that's actually absolutely tragic, considering everything that's happened. Yeah.
Are there any questions online? Let's do one or two online, and then I'll come back to you here.
So this is from Elysia Volkman from Voice of America Radio. She says, could you clarify how UK sanctions will influence sanctions in the US? And will it also set a precedent for the US to issue Magnitsky sanctions? And a follow-up, she says, will the UK be in dialogue with its US counterparts regarding sanctions? The UK would be setting a precedent if Mr. Cleverly approves sanctions.
So would the UK be setting a precedent?
Yes, if Mr. Cleverly approves sanctions.
Okay, and anything else?
Yes, there's another one from Monica Marks. She says, thank you, Kutha, for your brave testimony. My questions are, one, specifically what types of sanctions you're calling for? Are these similar to US Magnitsky sanctions? And two, what can UK parliamentarians do to help here?
With regard to UK-US sanctions, they're entirely separate regimes. Of course, the law is quite similar, and the one inspired the other, and they operate in a way where, if you look at the precedents that are set, they are very similar. But they are entirely different in how they are considered and then applied. So there will be a consideration in the US, as is going on at the moment, and there will be one here, and the decisions will then be made. Whether there's some consultation at a broad international diplomatic level, I'm not able to answer. But under the regimes, the Foreign Secretary here has to apply the law as it's set out, go through the various steps, and ensure that the requirements are met, and then impose the sanctions. So that will be done independent of anyone else, but we are encouraging collective action on this. And that's why we will be applying to the EU and to other bodies to take similar steps. And very often, if one starts, it makes it easier for others. Collective action is a very effective way of showing unity, and it's not one government singling out another government for some political reason. No, it's based on the evidence of human rights violations, taking those steps as a matter of law across the board for all countries to unite to highlight those violations and to show that there must be accountability. So that's what we're going to be striving for. With regard to whether this will be a precedent or not, yes, it will be the first for Tunisia, but there is clear precedent for exactly the same violations attracting sanctions from the UK and other bodies. This has happened in a number of other countries, and that's what we're saying. You should, based on those precedents, not make some kind of differential here. I'm not saying that's happening. We shouldn't make any differential. We should apply it in exactly the same way, in a principled and even-handed way to the situation in Tunisia. What can MPs do? Well, yes, it is a decision for the Foreign Secretary. That's where you make the application. But certainly, if MPs can raise this matter and others can raise this matter within Parliament and outside of Parliament, that will ensure that the issue is on the Foreign Secretary's agenda and that it shifts up. It's a question of moving it to high priority. This is an urgent matter. It's not something where it can wait, as I said earlier, until later in the year or next year. It's going to be now. So that's what they can do. They can call for that action now, as they've done many MPs in many other situations. We've seen this recently in relation to Russia and Ukraine. That's just one example. Other countries as well. And there's no reason why exactly the same exigency shouldn't apply in this situation. We shouldn't be putting one ahead of the other. We should look at all of them together, because that's what the regime is there to do, to apply across the board equally. Yeah. Is there another question here? And then I'll come. Okay, let's carry on online.
Yeah, so this is from...
let's go to the back.
So we need President first part of law implementation. When we talk about sanctions, considering that Tunisian people are really suffering more than benefits and dependence, are we targeted sanctions? Otherwise, we can make it up without owing humans. We need to make the demand for sanctions and defend the people from any external force, and the open is now trying to start with, which the Tunisians now are starting. We don't have sugar, we don't have many basics, so we have to be clear. We talk about sanctions with targets. And they also are supporting countries. Those people are supporting things and naturally outside the media, you might have players who are trying to make short term regarding the IMF. Because we see the stop the Arab Spring from restarting. We never done enough. So those who are supporting
If I can answer that, because that's a very important issue to clarify. Thank you. We are not looking to impose sanctions on the country as a whole or the institutions of the country that could affect people's ordinary living, their ability to survive in, I know, a very difficult economic situation at the moment. That is the beauty of these sanctions. They are targeted against the individuals who are in charge of the campaign where human rights violations are occurring. So they don't have to be the ones themselves detaining, but if they are in charge of the ministries that are doing that, if they know about it, if through their conduct and action they are allowing it to happen, then the sanctions are applied against them individually. So those 5 persons who I've named, the president, the 2 former ministers of Interior, the Justice Minister and the Minister of National Defense, and as I say, others can be added. The sanctions, if they are imposed, would be imposed against them in their individual capacity. They would not be able to travel. to the United Kingdom, their bank accounts would be frozen and their assets here would be frozen. Also, if we're able to get sanctions elsewhere, wherever those are, they can be tracked down. If they're in their companies or in the names of associates or family members, likewise, they can all be pursued and it will apply against them only. The idea being that they should be held account for their actions. It's to punish them and deter them from taking further action. So the ordinary people of Tunisia will not feel the brunt of it. In fact, it's designed to ensure that they are liberated from the situation that they are in at the moment. So it's very specific to go after those people, even though they're not put on trial as alleged criminals, but they will have these sanctions imposed to punish them for what has happened. Of course, it's key then to identify the people very specifically, which we've done, know where they're traveling, know what their assets are, and look to close the net around them so that it serves as a major pressure point on them to stop the violations that are going on. And just to answer the previous question, I think it fits in neatly. We are looking for all of the same sanctions that apply through the Magnitsky legislation in the US as well, which is travel bans, asset bans, accounts, stopping persons doing business on our shores. That's what the Foreign Secretary said. We don't want torturers to be able to come here and conduct their life as normal, go and shop at Harrods, have bank accounts, conduct their business, and also promote their politics abroad, whether it be on our shores or elsewhere. That is the purpose of this. It's a very effective and modern method of seeking to ensure that human rights violators don't get away with it. We don't have to have endless trials and criminal prosecutions. It can be done through a properly monitored and vetted sanctions regime.
Yes, so this is from Patrick Winter. Can you say anything about your father's health and political direction of the opposition?
In regards to my father's health, I think we hadn't heard from him for a while. He stopped his hunger strike on the 11th of March to prepare for Ramadan. It did deteriorate, but we're assuming that he should be, we can only go by assumptions at the moment. With regards to the opposition, I think right now there isn't much that opposition can do in Tunisia, and I think that's another reason why we had this press conference and that we want to talk to the international community. Lawyers are powerless in Tunisia. The opposition are being jailed. All critics are being jailed. New scapegoats every day, from political critics to Black African migrants. So really, it's actually up to us abroad to pressure our governments with sanctions, with condemnation, and that's, yeah.
I'll take any final questions here and then we'll wrap up. Just to say, we will be here afterwards if there are individual interviews that you wish to do. But there was one question here at the back, I think. What was that? Don't know where that.
There's
one more online. Then.
Sure. This is from Chow Deng. You say that there are comparable examples of UK sanctions imposed on foreign leaders. Be specific. And she follows up. When was the last time the 4 individuals you're seeking sanctions against travelled to the UK? Do they have any assets in the UK to your knowledge?
To answer the last part first, as I said earlier on, we can't say much more about it at this stage. We've made a confidential submission to the Foreign Secretary in respect of what we want to happen. And there are various mechanisms that can be used here as well to be able to investigate and trace assets. So we are going to follow that process and use the means that we have available to ensure that if sanctions are imposed, they will have real bite on assets. We are also, as always in these cases, looking at those persons who travel abroad, because as you know, there is universal jurisdiction for these offences, and we're very acutely aware of the ways in which that could apply to persons if there's evidence to show that they have been involved in the commission of torture and other international crimes. So we are following that as well. But all of these persons are in positions and prominence where travel internationally is vital. Nowadays, it's not a world any longer where you just do business from behind the gates of your parliament. We are seeing the need for international travel, summits. There are conferences like COP taking place. And in this context, all of these persons are going to need to travel, and travel bans will affect their individual capacity, but also their ability to continue governing, which is what, as Kalpa has highlighted, we are most focused on, that they should not be allowed to continue governing in this fashion and smothering out the democracy that has been there, but where the light has now gone out. It needs to be turned on again through changing the practices and ensuring that the ideals that were striven for during the Arab Spring can be given real life again. So this is the point of the sanctions. It's to ensure that you can't continue conducting government around the world as though nothing is going on, that you're still entirely accepted. There have to be lines drawn, and even if they do have support from many countries, our government should be standing up for what is right, not listening to what their allies should say, but being focused on the evidence that we've presented. I think it is very important also to highlight how what the current government is doing is trying to prevent other people from speaking out. You mentioned the judges, with a very chilling warning going out from the president that if judges don't go along with them, well, then they could be.
This is purely for Kais and his enablers. Yeah, I think that's.
Okay, if there's nothing further, we'll bring it to a close now. We are here if there are any questions or other interviews, and also to get the exact names and spellings, we can provide that. Thank you very much for attending, and we do wish to reiterate again that this is the first of many steps that we want to take. We do need as much attention drawn to the issue and support, and we thank you for joining us today for that very noble purpose. Thank you.
Thank you.